So we're going to start slowly. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this new session on Health Plant. We've done many technical sessions before.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to everyone. Je pense que la majorité d'entre vous
I
me connaissez
believe
bien.
that
Je
the
suis Marie-Hélène
majority of you
Questemont. Je
know me.
travaille
My
dans
name is
l'équipe
Marie-Hélène
régulation des
Questemont,
normes du COLEADIS,
and I'm
que je
part
suis experte
of
en santé.
the COLEAD team,
I
and I'm
believe most
a
of you already
plant
know
health
me.
expert.
My name is Marie-Hélène Questemont. I work with the COLEAD team. I'm an expert in plant health. This webinar will be delivered in 2 languages. In French, some presentation will be in French, some in English. So please put the interpretation on. I will show you the slides. As from now, I will speak French. Voilà. Donc, là, les présentations aujourd'hui seront en français et en
So our
anglais.
presentations today will be both in French and English, depending on the person who will be speaking, whether they're francophone or anglophone. And if you need simultaneous translation, I suggest that you go on the icon that looks like a globe. You click on it and you select languages and your preferred language, French or English in this case. So welcome to this new session on plant health. So we are going to delve into the details of what a systems approach is about. And this is a crucial approach, and it is important to gain a better understanding of it and to master it, particularly in order to comply with European Union requirements. But before we begin, I'd like to go over a few practical points. So this session will be recorded. The recording will be shared and you will receive the slides both in French and English after this session. Most of the questions will be answered in English to make it easier today, but you can ask questions through the Q&A box or the chat function. It would be difficult to give the floor to participants, but if we're not too numerous, it might be possible at the very end to give you the floor. Otherwise, use the Q&A or chat function to ask your questions. We will start. The presentation will last about an hour. We will start with Chediguema Kedera, who is from COLEAD, and he's going to introduce the COLEAD and FFM Plus system. He will introduce the key elements of his systems approach. I will give you some key data on implementation and interceptions at EU borders and tell you what are the essentials to know for accessing the EU market. And I will show you the slides, which should make it easier for you to follow. And we will also present some tools which have been developed by IPP some of the tools that have been developed at international level, in other words, for assessment and implementation of this systems approach. There will be a second presentation of the tools, which is associated to the work of COLEAD, and this will be made from our colleague from Research and Innovation from COLEAD, and there will be at the end a presentation by Mariana Theiser from South Africa. She is going to tell us about her experience about systems approach, and we'll end with question and answers. So we'll get down to the heart of the matter with our colleague Dr. Kedera now, who will present the first 2 items of our agenda. You have the floor, Mr. Dr. Kedera.
Hello. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We'll start with a general COLEAD overview. I'm certain that a majority of you already know what COLEAD is. We say COLLEAD is the Committee Linking Entrepreneurship, Agriculture and Development. COLLEAD generally has been in existence for over 50 years. It is a network and a toolbox, depending on how you look at it. It's brought together as a non-for-profit association with over 500 members. And we've actually focused on developing tools and knowledge. For example, this webinar that we are having today, mobilizing expertise and providing capacity building. We focus on value chain development, looking at market access, and we cover several themes. Key of them being SPS, which forms the discussion today, sustainable agriculture, management of organization and business development, and then looking at pedagogical methods. We work across the continents, as you can see up in the picture, several areas where we are involved with in over 143 countries. And we've got a team of over 70 countries. Next slide. So while talking about SPS, one of the key things is the systems approach, which informs the discussion today. Next slide. And we're going to look at it starting with what are the key components. All of us, I believe, are aware of ISPM. ISPM meaning the International Standards for Phytosanitary Measures number 14, under which we look at a systems approach integrating different pest risk management options. And what is meant by a systems approach? We are looking at least 2 independent measures which have got the effect of ensuring compliance with the phytosanitary requirements by an importing country. It can be provided as an equivalent, and it's often seen as being less trade restrictive as opposed to a single measure. And these measures can either be applied pre-harvest, that is in the field, at harvest, it can be in the pack house, and it can be during monitoring. Remember that the key words here being independent measures and at least 2. How you apply them, what is needed, and what you do is going to come in the next slides. Next slide, please. And why do we consider the use of systems approach? The first thing is that it must be robust and flexible, focusing on managing the phytosanitary risk. And you can manage this through showing data. And this is where a majority of us then run into trouble. What sort of data is required by the importing country? Because as an exporting country, then you have to provide this data that shows that the systems approach is functional. Because a single measure alone, for example, inspection or a treatment, may not be practical, and there is no data to show that you are achieving the desired levels of control in terms of ensuring that the consignment that's being sent through complies with the requirements. And therefore, it may include measures such as pest-free areas, field management, monitoring, trapping, inspection, sanitation, testing, packing, controls, treatments, traceability, and safeguards. Just go back, please. These are things that are always experienced by inspectors in the field. And for these measures, we say they must be clearly be defined. You must show that they're efficacious. And for this, you require data. And if you've said a measure is going to be used in the systems approach, then it must officially be required. That is, it is indicated in the regulatory systems. And you should be able to monitor it under the control and responsibility of the NPPO. And what we always insist on is that If you say you are looking at the measures in a systems approach, they must be formalized and implemented, and they can be verified, not just drafted and put in a document. So most of the time, sometimes the systems approach may be developed by an importing country, and as an exporting country, then you follow the procedures of what is required. But it can also be co-developed between the two countries. Next slide. In systems approach, you have the option of either you applying a quantitative method or a qualitative method. Quantitative methods are used when you've got data. For example, the surveillance, the trapping, the inspection, efficacy data. Do you have that data so that it can actually show the effectiveness of the measure? Or when you do use a qualitative method, that is expert judgment. We know for a fact, expert judgment sometimes falls flat because an inspector alone, if you are doing effective work, then there shouldn't be an issue. But because there are issues in terms of what is exported, then you need to provide quantitative data to show that the qualitative measures that you applied are effective. Remember that it is provision of data that actually assures the trading partner you are doing the right things. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Do we also note that the ISPM 14 is closely linked to PRA, which is known by a majority of us. Pest risk assessment or pest risk analysis helps identify the relevant pathway of a pest. So you must identify the pest, you know the pathway, you undertake a risk assessment in order to determine what systems approach is applicable, or the systems approach that you're going to apply to manage the risk that is associated with the pest. And you may select the one pest risk management option, but then how effective is it? And that's how you get back to the quantitative approach. And whichever option you pick, it's always insisted it must be justified and consistent with the provisions of IPPC / the WTO SPS agreement. Remember, the WTO SPS agreement mandates you to apply higher standards as long as it is technically justified. In implementing a systems approach to meet EU planned requirements, you must ensure there is coordination and understanding of the requirements by all the stakeholders in the value chain. Right from planning to the NPPO, do we all understand what is expected and what should be documented and what is required to monitor that whatever is being done is working? And in this context, then we say effective public-private dialogue is essential to agree on which measure is important. It is not enough for the NPPO to say this is what is required if the private sector does not understand. The private sector may have all the best techniques, best equipment, but if it is not linked to what the NPPO is doing, it does not achieve anything. So the two have to work together, and a public-private dialogue is therefore essential. And we always say that if you define the responsibility of each stakeholder from the time you get the plant in the ground to the time you're harvesting for export, then you will achieve what is required of a systems approach. And it is always important that the stakeholders understand what the NPPO's roles are and responsibilities and how they need to support the NPPO towards achieving a systems approach. Next slide. And we say that if the stakeholders work together, you avoid a lot of repeated interceptions. Remember what we've talked about in terms of qualitative approach inspection, endpoint inspection, or systems approach, but you still have interceptions at the border points. If there are more interceptions, it means stricter measures are applied. As we've seen for the case of mangoes, fruit flies in West Africa, we've seen on FCM on capsicum or FCM on roses. It is a very important thing that stakeholders work together. For the stakeholders to work together, you need to establish the platforms that allow for the engagement, direct engagement, to see what is required to develop an action plan that is adapted to the local context in order to address the requirements, whether you're a big exporter or a small exporter. And this is actually aimed at sustaining access to the EU market. Remember, the number of interceptions that you have can affect the access that you have because you then go to stricter requirements. Next slide. Next slide. So these are the key components of the systems approach, and we will hear from Marie-Hélène why it is central to the EU market access. Marie-Hélène.
Merci beaucoup, Chagema, pour cette présentation très claire. N'oubliez pas,
Thank you very much, Chagema, for this very clear presentation. And I remind the participants that if they have questions, they should not hesitate to put them in the Q&A or in the chat box. And you'll understand now why the systems approach is so central to the EU market access. Anything connected to plant health is regulated by different legislations, and one is important for all exporters, because it lists all of the pests for fruit, for vegetables in particular, and all of these requirements will be found in Regulation 2019-2072. In Annex 7, you will find the specific requirements for each commodity, for each product. At CoLead, we work mainly with fruits and vegetables, so I'm going to give you two examples, the mango and capsicum and peppers and chilies. So in this case, the EU gives you several options, and often at level A, the country should be pest-free, and then you have category A, B, C, D, E, and then you have pest-free production area or a pest-free production site. And so you have one of the options in this case, which is post-harvest treatment or systemic approach. So in the case of capsicum, a whole retinue of measures were listed to make sure that products would be pest-free when they arrive at the EU doors. So this is really central that you describe thoroughly all of the measures that you're going to adopt, and the EU has accepted this. Here I'm listing the various options that are listed in the international standards, so the ISPMs. You will receive all the slides later, so do not worry. So for certain items, it is important to communicate with the EU. So anytime you have a systems approach, you need to communicate with the EU to check whether it is accepted. There is one specific case, which is the fall armyworm, which is an exception, but you will find all this in the document. And if you have questions, again, don't hesitate to indicate them in the question and answers or chat box. So to get back to the context, we are going to look in the regulation 29/2072, what is indicated regarding mango and the FCM for peppers, chilies, and capsicum. So in item 5061, there is a list of products which list those products that need a phytosanitary certificate. So for citrus, kumquat, citrus, mango, oranges, and all the countries. So under item 61 of Annex 7, you will find all of this which concerns the systems approach. The same for item 62 under Annex 7, all of the requirements for the FCM, so also for false codling moth and the commodities involved. For option D, I have listed because whenever you have a phytosanitary certificate, it is important to make a copy and paste of what is listed here. And so, for instance, here for item D, you will see that the requirements need to stem from an organization which has been approved by the organization, by the NPPO. So a systems approach, if this is selected, it means that you have decided to adopt a systems approach to make sure that all of your shipments will be pest-free, at least for this FCM. So for FCM, the EU is asking for stricter requirements than for fruit fly, for instance. And in this file that people need to send to the EU, they need to demonstrate that the system was efficient. This is something that you would not have, or which would not be required for fruit fly, because when you look at the changes that have been introduced to the various requirements, you can tell that the EU is adopting a stricter approach regarding requirements. So in the case of capsicum and the FCM, you need to demonstrate that the systems approach that you have adopted is efficient and it works. In addition, there will be an inspection of the products, and in case of doubt, you need to divide by 2, and of course, the phytosanitary certificate will be required, as well as traceability. Now, to get back in general to what needs to be put in place in order to demonstrate that you have pest-free commodities, there are a number of things that you need to put in place. In your file sent to the EU, you globally explain how you're going to put in place this systems approach. But anything described is rather general. But in the field, you need to go through item by item in detail. For instance, in the field, you need to detail for those who work in the field directly. So generally, it's the company itself that needs to explain how the traps have been set, how you ensure follow-up, describe each person's task. This is not something that is going to be put in the file, which will be sent to the EU. So you need to have specific procedures for each item. So regarding the traps, they will be checked. The check of the traps will be done, say, every other week or every day. You keep records of the information at a given place. This is not indicated in the file sent to the EU, but you need to have it in place. Same thing regarding harvest. Explain how you proceed to check that and to ensure that your commodity is pest-free. In which circumstances should the commodity be denied access? Should I signal it? Should I report it? So the whole traceability aspect. So there are a number of things that need to be detailed, and this is a must. You need to put it in writing so that at a later stage you can correct the problem should it occur again. Regarding pack houses, also you need to detail a number of things. When the system is properly put in place and that you have properly described everything, please verify that each link, each stage is properly managed. So that means that you need to have a checklist and have people in charge of the follow-up of the checks. And you want to make sure, in case of problems, that decisions are made and that corrective actions are put in place. It is on this basis that the systems approach can be demonstrated to work, and then the competent authority will be reassured that the commodity is pest-free, and then it will issue the phytosanitary certificate. So there needs to be a link between what is done in the public sector and in the private sector, so the private company. We also need to make sure that shipments come either from the farm or the orchard where the product was grown. And it is a must for the system to be reliable, trustworthy, robust, that data be recorded. So it's not enough to say so-and-so did this. You need to say why he did it, when he did it, what were the problems that had been observed. For instance, there were more pests than expected. So all that needs to be recorded, verified, and leads to a decision by the competent authority to see whether or not a certificate can be delivered. I wanted to go over the role of each actors, whether an importing country or exporting countries. Now, in this case, we're going to look at it from the lenses of the European Union, because everyone has a responsibility. So each organization, each IPCC, according to IPCC, you need to have a checklist. And I'm giving you the example of the EU, but this is applicable to all countries. So the EU, amongst its requirements, needs to try not to hamper trade. So there can be requirements to protect the EU from infestation, introduction of pests, but it should avoid hampering trade. And one of the roles is to check whether it agrees with you regarding the approach that you have selected. Sometimes an audit will be conducted to see whether the system is compliant or not. And in case of non-compliance, sanctions may be adopted, and some redress in case the system really does not work properly. There have been several cases. For instance, the case of capsicum, it was not associated to systems approach, but nonetheless, the requirements have been strengthened when the importing countries noticed that the system didn't work, or that the systems approach didn't work. So here, regarding the exporting countries, whether you are a company or a public authority, the first stage for you would be to see who is exporting, what you want to export, what are the requirements. Next, if systems approach needs to be carried out, because it's one of the only possibilities, we know that fruit fly is present in a large number of countries and it's extremely complex to control it, and there is not a single measure that will work, and some of the measures are not feasible post-harvest. So what happens in this case is that the country And when I say the country, it means that the public and the private sector need to collaborate to compile the file that will be submitted to the European Union and to show that the systems approach does work. So you have lots of information regarding the product, the commodity, the variety, the sensitivity to this particular type of pest, volumes, how production is organized, how shipment is organized, how packaging is organized. So as much information as possible so that the EU can make a decision. Once all this is accepted and the system is put in place, it is important for the competent authority to supervise all of these actions. So that means monitoring internal checks, internal audits, so that is part and parcel of a quality system on the part of the competent authority, and see that everyone is fulfilling their responsibilities. For instance, in adopting corrective actions. This is one of the major roles of the competent authority when delivering a phytosanitary certificate. Make sure that the shipment has taken place in a proper manner, that the commodity was properly packaged, shipped, and that all this is compliant with the requirements indicated in the systems approach that was accepted by the European Union. Let me have a look now at what happens regarding non-compliance that were observed when products arrived at the EU border. The first stage is that the agents at the borders of Europe will check, say it's imports of mango from a certain country. They will check what the country communicated to the EU about exporting mangoes. I've indicated here the links. I mean, you will see that this has changed quite a lot compared to the documents that had been provided by the EU last year. Last year, there was a web page with all the PDFs that gathered all of the communications and the requirements for each country. Now, this has changed. They have a large Excel table where you can select your country and see what the requirements are. So here you see all of the, on these two columns, you see the reference to legislation. So the Annex 7 of Regulation 2019 of the 20th of September. And you see why this requirement is important. See, this applies to all countries of the world. Here it says to what products, what commodity it applies, and the various options, the various requirements, and for what option was chosen for which country. So here, for this country here, exporting mango, the systems approach had been suggested, but since June 2025, this country can no longer export it, and it is clearly said that this systems approach may no longer be used by this country. And I will see you why there are a large number of non-conformity. Here, let's take the example of another country also exporting mango, but here there's a check. So that means that this country may export mango since January 2020, provided they apply the systems approach. Now, let's have a look at the notifications. I hope you're familiar with this system or with this web page. Actually, when you go to the host page of CoLead, you see colead.link.analytics, you see a number of icons, and one of the icons is statistical analytics. And if you click on that, you will see that one of the parts in green lists all of the notifications. So those are dashboards, which are quite dynamic. And so it illustrates the various interceptions that took place in 2025 in the imports from ACPs because of fruit fly. So I looked at pests and fruit fly. and
Donc, on
I
voit les
looked at the
notifications
statistical
qu'il y a eu en
analytics, and you
2025.
see all of the
On voit
notifications that
que
took
donc,
place in
pour rappel, donc,
2025.
si on veut
And
exporter
just as a
des
reminder,
mangues, on voit que
if
c'est
you
le,
want to
le
export
problème,
mango,
il faut
mango is the
avoir
main
un
problem
dossier.
here with
Donc, pour avoir
fruit
le
fly.
dossier,
You
il
need
faut
to
avoir
submit a
développé une
file.
approche
To submit a
systémique pour
file,
l'Union
you need to
européenne.
have
Donc, on
a
voit que beaucoup de pays
systems
ont
approach for the
développé
EU.
donc, une
And
approche
many countries
systémique,
have
sont autorisés
indeed
à exporter
developed
de
a
la mangue,
systems
mais il y a
approach,
eu
and they are authorized
énormément
to
de
export their
notifications de
mango, but
non-conformité
there have been
pour cause de
lots of
mouches des fruits
notifications
l'année
for
passée. Donc,
non-conformity
on voit
because
ici
of
les
fruit
différents
fly
problèmes et on voit bien
last
que c'est
year. And you
principalement la
see
mangue qui est
here
le
that
problème.
it is mango which is
Donc
the
ici, dans le
main
deuxième cas,
problem here.
ici,
In
j'ai
the
fait
second
la même
example
chose, à
here,
part
I've
que
done
j'ai
exactly
cliqué
the same,
sur
except
moth,
that I
donc qui est
clicked
tout ce qui
on
est
moth.
nids,
So
papillons.
any
Devant
butterflies, moth,
Carpocap, c'est indiqué, il faut éliminer
FCM
aussi
is often
dans cette
mentioned,
catégorie-là.
and
Donc ici, on voit
so
aussi
false
qu'il y a
codling moth. And in this
exporter.
case,
Donc,
if
de
you click
nouveau,
on
le
moth,
capsicum,
you
donc
see
tout
that
ce qui est
to
piment, on
export
voit qu'il y a énormément de
capsicum,
notifications
so
pour ce
peppers,
produit-là et
chilies, and so
que
on,
c'est lié
you
donc à
need
certains pays,
to
donc comme le
see
Kenya
that
qui a eu 900
restrictions
interceptions,
applies to
Burkina, le
certain
Sénégal.
countries such as Kenya, where there were
Donc
7
il faut aussi poster avec
interceptions,
ces tableaux-là. Je
Senegal.
vous
So you
encourage
need
à aller voir
to play around with
sur
those
nos dashboards,
tables,
donc
and I
sur notre
invite
site
you
web.
to go and
Vous
look at
retrouvez
the
toutes ces informations-là et vous pouvez
dashboards
vérifier un peu
on our
toutes les parties pour
website.
voir
Click and
voir
play around with
les
it so
différentes
that you get
notifications qu'il y
familiar
a eu. Donc,
and
bien
see
sûr,
the
pour
various
rappel, ce sont des données publiques. Et ce
notifications
que
that
nous
were
n'avons pas accès
issued.
directement
This is
aux
something
données des
new. We
autorités
don't have
compétentes. Donc, si vous avez
direct
besoin de plus
access to the
d'informations, vous pouvez être
data
obligé d'aller voir notre
of the
système
competent
TRACE
authority. If you want more
pour avoir ces
information, you
informations.
need to enter the traces system
Voilà.
to have
Donc, c'était pour
access to
illustrer
more
qu'il est vraiment
specific
très
information.
important
This is to
que
say
quand on
that
met
it
une
is
approche
really
systémique en place,
important that when you put in place a
il est
systems approach,
essentiel en
it
fait
is paramount
qu'il fonctionne.
to
Parce qu'un
make
système, dès
sure
qu'on
that
trouve
it
des
works,
notifications, ça
because
veut dire
as
que le
soon as
système
you
ne
have
fonctionne pas.
notifications, it
Donc
means
l'Union
that the system
européenne
does not work.
a des
And the
doutes et
EU has
après ils peuvent
then some
revenir sur
doubts,
cette
and
autorisation-là
it
et
may
ça peut créer quand
withdraw the
même beaucoup de
authorization,
problèmes.
which
Donc il est
would
essentiel que chaque
entail
pays qui
lots
met en
of
place une
problems.
approche
So
systémique fasse
each
un
country
suivi
that adopts a systems
et que
approach
l'approche
needs
soit mise
to
en œuvre de
have
manière
carry out some
correcte
follow-up to make
et
sure that the
bien suivie.
systems
Et
approach
donc pour cela,
is
vous voyez, on
correctly
voit déjà des pays qui ont
implemented.
certaines
You can
difficultés.
see
Donc être
some of the
sûr après
countries
d'aller
are
vérifier d'où
experiencing
ils
some
viennent les
difficulties. They
non-conformités,
need to
pourquoi,
see
la
where
cause
the
et aller réagir
non-conformities
et
come
mettre
from.
en œuvre
So
des
what is
actions
the
correctives.
cause so that they can
Voilà.
properly react
J'espère
and
que j'ai
introduce
été
some corrective
claire. N'oubliez pas
actions.
de
I
mettre vos
hope this
questions
was
dans le
clear.
chat si vous
Do
le
not forget
désirez.
to
Donc
put
maintenant, on
your
va
questions
passer à
in
la
the
partie
chat
suivante
box.
qui
And
concerne
we
les
now
outils
move
qui ont
to
été
the next
développés
part,
pour
which
aider
deals
à la
with
mise en
the
œuvre,
tools
développement
that have
d'approches
been developed
systémiques.
to
Donc
strengthen
notre première
implementation,
intervenante
especially of systems
est
approach.
une
Our first
seconde.
speaker
Donc je vais laisser maintenant la parole à Phyllis.
will be
Donc Phyllis va
Phyllis.
nous présenter
Phyllis
l'outil
is
d'aide à la
going to
décision pour
introduce
l'approche
this
systémique. En
decision-making
anglais, donc ils
tool
appellent ça le
for
DSSA.
systems
Donc
approach. It's called
Phyllis Kitaiga est une
DSSA.
spécialiste de résolution des thèmes
Phyllis
phytosanitaires. Elle
Kidgaya
travaille
is
depuis
a
plus de 25
specialist
ans
in
au sein
sanitary and
du service d'inspection
phytosanitary
phytosanitaire
measures and
Kitaiga,
has worked for
donc
over
on le voit
25
sur
years
Office,
at the
où elle
Kenya
a occupé
Plant
diverses
Health
fonctions et
Inspectorate called
travaillé dans différents
KEFIS, where
départements,
she has held
notamment
various
chargée de
positions and
l'assurance
worked in
qualité des
different
exportations
departments,
et des
including
importations
those
et de
responsible for
l'inspection
exports and
phytosanitaire,
import quality
ainsi qu'en
assurance,
tant que
plant health,
coordinatrice par
and
intérim
seed
du département des
inspection.
normes et du
And she
commerce.
also acted
Elle a
as
joué un
interim
rôle
coordinator
déterminant dans
of the Standards
l'élaboration
and
de
Trade
l'outil Decision
Department.
Support
Uh,
System Approach,
uh,
DSSA. Elle
so
fait
she
partie des
plays a
12
key role
formateurs
in
des outils
implementing
qui
the
s'appelle aussi
DSSA.
Biocompliance,
She
validé par la
also has
CIPV.
biocomplaints, which
Donc tout
was
cela, vous allez
validated by
retrouver ça sur le site de la CIPV
12
également. Je ne penserai pas
IPCC
vous montrer
beyond
toutes les slides
compliance
sur
tools.
ce sujet-là.
So she's going to tell us
Et
about
elle
all this.
soutient, donc
And
elle a développé
she
cela en collaboration avec
developed
la
this
CIPV.
in
Phyllis est également
cooperation with
experte en PIMA.
IPCC.
Elle a
Phyllis is
travaillé sur
also
les
a
POMC, elle est
PIMA
formatrice
expert.
certifiée FSI
She's an ITC
et
trainer,
préside le
certified
comité
ITC
national
trainer,
SPS du Kenya au nom
and
de
she
KEFIS.
chairs Kenya's National SPS
Phyllis, un
Committee
grand
on
merci
behalf
d'être
of
avec
KEFIS.
nous aujourd'hui et
Phyllis, we're
de nous
honored to welcome
présenter
you
cet
today
outil
and
qui semble vraiment
to
très
listen
important,
to
très
your
intéressant
presentation about this tool. It sounds extremely interesting, maybe a bit complicated, so we're waiting for your explanations, and we're all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. I hope and I want to believe I can be heard. Yes, we can go ahead and discuss on the decision support for systems approach. Okay, so this tool is a Beyond Compliance Global Project tool, as has been explained by Marie. And the purpose is that it supports the evaluation as well as the development of a systems approach to pest risk management, as clearly defined in the ISPM 14. I believe we are all familiar with ISPM 14. As well as other supportive international phytosanitary measures standards. So what it does, it enables the user to transparently identify potential options and as well as formulate plans for specific pest risk management. It allows you to collate and to elicit as well as visualize the available information about a pest crop system that could introduce or spread regulated pests through international trade. It's noteworthy that this has only been tested for the horticultural trade, such as cut flowers, with the associated arthropod and pathogens. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, this tool is available in the IPPC website, and this is how it looks. The page for the tool looks like this. And this page allows you also to not only to find the tool, but you can also find the facilitators, the IPP's facilitators in that page. Now, these tools were developed, as has been explained, collaboratively with the number of NPPO staff who came from the FAO region, and is available in the 6 languages, that is English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Chinese, and Russia. And it also has a manual on that same page. So the manual is able to assist you and instruct you on how you're going to download the tool. So I would recommend each one of us to be able to visit the page and interact with the tool. It's not as complicated as sometimes it appears. The manual will help you to navigate through. So I'm only highlighting a few areas that will just enable you to interact more with the tool. However, you can always invite a facilitator, any of the listed facilitators in the IPPC to assist you. Next. Yes, now this is the first page you'll find in the tool. On my left is the manual that I've just talked about. But the tool itself, this is the first page you find. The tool allows you to use either for export or import. So you choose the systems approach that you are working on. Is it for export or is it import? So it has three parts. The first part allows you to give a background information that relates to the country, that relates to the crop, that relates to any PRIA that has been conducted. So there are various items to fill in that relate to the background. The next part, that is the part B, it allows you to select measures. We're going to look at it in a little bit more detail. And the last one is part C, that allows you to evaluate the measures. Next. Now, actually, before even we upload the measures, we have what we call the production chain or pathway. This is more of a diagram or a pictorial kind of figure that will allow the user to draft more or less the whole pathway from the beginning to the end. And along it, you are able to indicate objectives, the measures, what verifications you're going to carry out, any queries, and even to make any other comment or activities that are not necessarily measures. Now, when it comes, the first thing you do in a DSSA or the Decision Support for Systems approach is to indicate the objectives that you want to achieve. For example, here we have some suggested objectives. One, like you could indicate, you could have the objective that refers to indicating the level of pest challenge or infestation. You may also have another objective that you want to carry out in the systems approach that is the carry out measures that you reduce the pest challenge. Another objective can be to prevent pest infestation, reducing the pest infestation, to prevent reinfestation. Then you may have evidence of measure of implementation, which is very important. You also want to verify implementation performance. You also want to carry out traceability along the production chain. Next. Yeah, now when it comes to the production chain, it may look complicated here, but ideally each bubble has a color. And sorry for those who may be colorblind, but on my left, we have some bubbles that have the brown color, as well as to the extreme right. In the middle, we have blue colors, we have green colors, we have a pink color, and we also have white color. For example, in the brown color bubbles, what you have is objectives. What is the objective you want to carry out? And next, when you have the blue bubbles, they're indicating the measures you're going to carry out in order to meet that objectives. And then the green color is indicating the control point or the specific area you're going to check on those measures if they're working or not. You may also, along the chain, want to indicate certain measures you're going to carry out that are not measures, but activities that you may want to carry out that are not necessarily measures. And so when you draw like this, it gives you a kind of a pathway that you're going to have for each objective, as well as the activities that are along it. I think this production chain enables us to see clearly the definition of systems approach as it is defined in the ISPM 14. Next. Now, what we have here is what we said in part A. If you remember the first page, we said that you're going to upload information, that basic information that relates to the specific item you're dealing with. Is it a cut flower? And what is the name of that cut flower? The importing country, the exporting country, all that you upload there. And the other box that is on my right, that's on my right, is actually filling in the information that related to the PRA that was carried out. So this is just basic information that will also help us to indicate the measures that we think would be useful when we want to reduce the pest or want to achieve the objectives. Next. Yes. So the DSSA has another section. We call it it's table 2, table B. In this section, it will allow you for each one of the objectives that you indicated. It will allow you to upload all measures that you want to carry, that you propose that can be carried out in order to achieve that specific objective. Those measures are all listed in the table that has some red markings there. Then the next table, it will allow you, the tool will be automatically take you to the next stage, which will allow you now to list, or rather to shortlist the measures that you indicated. You're going to shortlist by removing those that may not necessarily be important in this case. And what I needed also to say is that you are doing this with experts that have knowledge of the pests, experts that have knowledge of maybe regulatory work, experts that are agronomists, experts that are perhaps pathologists, depending on the area you are discussing. So the next part, we are going to shortlist. After we shortlist those measures, it means some of them you are able to look at them and decide these ones do not necessarily apply, they are not useful. So once you shortlist, the last box is allowing you for each one of the objective to be able to be aligned with the specific measures. So for each objective, there are measures that will now be able to indicate, according to how you did it, that these are the measures that finally have been left for this specific objective. Next. Now, the next, when you are shortlisting the measures, you are shortlisting them in order to evaluate those measures against the objectives that you have. The experts are going to evaluate the performance of the performance of those measures against 6 different indicators dimensions. One of them is, what is the contribution of that specific measure to the pest risk reduction of the infestation, for example, in exported consignment? So the expert, because we are talking of people who have had interaction with perhaps with that specific pest, they're able to indicate what is the contribution of that measure. What is the contribution of that measure towards the implementation standard? It is not, when we talk about the implementation standard, we are saying that in practical sense, the measure may not necessarily give us the maximum contribution of the risk reduction. This is because of certain constraints that may be in place, or natural variations. So the expert is able to indicate what is the implementation standard between a rating that I'm going to indicate later. Then we are also going to rate it against the ability to verify the effect of that measure at the control point. For example, maybe the control point is at the production point. This specific measure that you have indicated, how much are you able to verify its effect? So we're going to see how that's also done. And then the other thing you're going to rate of each measure is against the producer acceptability. The producer may perhaps have costs that are reflected in it, the labor that is required. It might be sometimes not as practical, or maybe with ease. So we are going to be able to evaluate and give a certain measure on that. Then the other one is sector acceptability. For example, the industry. Industry, we are referring to the packers, the processors, the technology developers, and so on. How acceptable is that measure you want to carry out? Then we have the societal acceptability. The measure that we have indicated, how is it accepted in the society? For example, the consumers, the public, the environmental advocacies, and so on. Now, in this area, we find the first evaluation that we indicated, which was in this specific measure. For example, it can be an indicator trap. What is the contribution to the pest reduction of infestation of that in the consignment? And when we say the contribution, we are talking about the maximum achievable effect at the ideal condition. So the experts are going to rate whether we rate it. The expert will rate that at a point scale of 5, beginning with very low to very high. That is very low, low, medium, high, or very high. So the pointer scale in the rating, for example, in this case, the experts decided that contribution is medium. But then they are also going to express their uncertainty in the rating they have provided. And so the uncertainty is also rated, like in this one, is given to be very low. Now, the interaction of those two, the rating and the uncertainty, is able to give us a graph as indicated there. This also goes to the implementation standard. What is the rating of that implementation standard? And let me say that with uncertainty, the rating is a 4-point scale. That is not the same as the expert, the rating. It's not the same as where we have the rating. So for uncertainty, we use the international acceptable measure that is very low, high, and very high. And then we also have now the implementation standard. So you see another graph is formed there. So the DSSA is also is simply an Excel. I needed to say that. That is an Excel file that is enabling this the micros to function as the expert chooses the indicator they want. Next. Next. Now, we have said that the experts are evaluating against 6 indicators. So the next one is the ability to verify effectiveness of that measure. So it is the same objective that we are still evaluating against the ability to verify the effect of that measure. We rate it and we give the uncertainty, and we are able to get the graph. The same thing goes ahead to the producer acceptability, as well as the sector and the societal. And so this one looks like many graphs, but the tool will eventually allow you to have an evaluation of all that will now be evaluated by the tool to give one result that tells you the function and the performance of the system as a whole, so that you'll be able to see it. Is it red? Is it green? Green meaning it's workable, or is it red that you say that is not workable? Next. Yeah, this is just to say that these are the facilitators that have been trained by IPPC, And all their names and details are in the IPPC website. And so you can be able to access any and engage any of them. Next. I believe it's the end, so I want to say thank you.
Un tout grand merci, Phyllis. C'était vraiment très clair et très instructif.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. It was extremely clear and highly instructive because not everyone is aware that those tools do exist and that they are available, accessible on the IPCC website. So I invite you to go and have a look. We're moving on to the next part of the presentation of the tools, and I'm giving the floor to my colleague Thomas Lopez from Colleague. So thank you very much, Marie-Hélène, and hello, everyone. So indeed, I'm going to have a vision on brokerage, on innovation and research. As we could see, the systems approach and the concept has been well defined, but we do know that nowadays we still have a lot of challenges regarding its implementation. One of the reasons for this, and it's not the only reason, but one of the important reasons for this difficulty is that solutions are not always available, or when they are available, they have not necessarily been validated at the local level, and sometimes difficult to access for certain operators or difficult to put in place. So our goal is to reduce the gap between research, innovation, and implementation in the field. Next slide. So this is a brief recap of the research and innovation brokerage that we apply at Colleague. The process starts with the identification of needs in the field. So first you identify the needs, and then you look at existing solutions that might solve the needs or respond to the needs. You consider the various solutions, and then you test them in the fields by having public-private partnerships and see whether in a given specific context they might work, and also in with certain crops and certain cultures. Then, once you have tested the solutions in the field, we disseminate the results and communicate to make sure that those that work best can be upscaled by the different stakeholders in the field. Next. As I was indicating, the brokerage process starts with establishing a priority in terms of research. So we have a multi-criteria analysis, either ergonomic ones, such as, for instance, which are the priority pests right now, what are the quarantine organizations, are there priority actions against these pests, are the solutions efficient for systems approach, for instance, that is one of the criteria. There are also criteria which are more geared towards the market, volumes imported and exported, what is the value of the crop. Those are elements that are taken into consideration in the prioritization, and also whether any changes in the regulations at EU, at MRLs, in the European Union, at Codex level. Are there also other data which are fed back by companies? And then once we have all those criteria, we establish our research priorities. Next. So, as I was indicating, once we have identified the priorities, we look at the innovations that might respond to the issues. Sources of innovations are wide and diverse. We can look at producers, manufacturers, plant producers. So you have different sources of innovations, to tell the truth. And once we have identified those innovations we want to test, we form public-private partnerships. Generally, the partner beneficiaries, co-lead partner beneficiaries will conduct trials, pilot projects. They will have access to production sites. They will co-design the protocol. They might do a sort of co-sharing with co-lead. Then they will also associate with experts to design experimental protocols. They will also establish cost sharing, so the financial or in-kind sharing. And so they do a test in real conditions to look at the technical aspects, but also at the economic analysis. Once you have covered all those aspects, co-lead's goal is to accelerate the test, the validation, and the appropriation of those solutions by the stakeholders in the field. Next. So to have a more granular approach regarding plant protection, there are different types of trials that can be put in place. Co-lead's objective in this case is to provide support to the operational phase of the IPM. So different types of trials will be conducted. We work on the registration of the plants, and to do this, we are going to have exploratory trials when several solutions exist but have never been tested for a specific crop or context. Then you choose those that have the best performance, and you submit them for registration so that they can be used in the countries that we are targeting, given the selected pests. We also look at residues, and this is to define good agricultural practices. So, because the idea is to comply with EU regulation, Codex regulation, MRLs, and so on, and to complete a registration file. And in the end, we also have an IPM, integrated pest management trials. And here we have several control aspects. We combine several methods to see whether this gives a better management of those pests and reduce the PPPs. Next. At the very beginning of the seminar, we referred to some issues with fruit flies. Ever since 2007, co-lead has been conducting trials to try and find additional solutions to fight against the fruit fly problem. And we have conducted more than 27 efficacy trials. We've used several methods, traps for fruit flies, but also spraying on the orchards. This is to give you a mere example of what co-lead is trying to do to make available for producers. These are solutions that could be integrated in a systems approach, for instance. That is the main message that I wanted to convey here as a member of co-lead.
Pendant tout ce processus-là, donc
throughout the process, validation in the field of those solutions is necessary, but we also move to the implementation phase. So for this to be valid for the producers, it needs to be practical, adapted to the local context, and there has to be a cost-effective benefit for the producers. And those solutions should also be aligned on the various regulations. And there needs to be dialogue with the NPPOs to integrate them in systems approaches. Once you have that, dissemination takes place thanks to sustainable production guides, SPGs, but there are other technical resources that COLLEAD provide, and there will be clear operational recommendations made to the operators. And for these solutions to be properly applied, obviously, you need to do some in-field training to help farmers apply these solutions in the field. Next. As I was indicating, one of the dissemination tools for these solutions is a sustainable production guide. Actually, there are several guides. It describes the crop, it describes the pre-planting management stages, so preparing the soil, the planting itself, the pre-harvest management, and harvest. In those guides, lots of information are provided which are useful for the implementation of systems approach, especially for pest control and other diseases. So it's a wealth of information, extremely comprehensive. There are other technical resources. For instance, we have a guide with indications for NPPOs to conduct an audit of the systems approach. So it's very specific, but we also have other resources which might be useful. For instance, specific guides to control some pests such as FCM, as we said before. We also have technical brochures on new technologies that might be useful for monitoring certain pests and diseases. That could also be useful for systems approach. So all of these resources might be consulted by the beneficiary partners of COLLEAD. I was telling you that we were conducting different trials to test those solutions in the field. Obviously, this generates data, and COLLEAD uses this data and publishes the data in scientific publications to inform of the outcomes obtained in specific contexts. And this is also to inform the scientific community so that additional research can be conducted and try to develop further methods to fight against pests. So this means that COLLEAD is also contributing to the scientific endeavors. Next slide. So amongst the resources, we have a database on crop protection. It provides information about active substances that have authorized registration products which are used in the ACP countries. So this crop protection database will give you information about how to use the products, how to comply with the MRLs. And for systems approach, we're using a database on trials conducted by COLEAD on biopesticides. As soon as it is published, you will see the different trials that were conducted by COLEAD with biopesticides and the types of pests and diseases that were studied, what was tested, and what could be integrated in a systems approach. Next slide. My key message to conclude is to say that a systems approach is not just about combining measures. You need to make sure that the measures are adapted to the local context, that they are validated, and that they work together properly in practice. Thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas, for this presentation with this extremely interesting tool. And again, I'm inviting the participants to go and have a look at this information. I will stop sharing my presentation and I will give the floor to Mariana. Mariana, would you be kind enough to share your presentation? We have the pleasure of having Mariana Theiser, who will give us the experience of South Africa. So Mariana, this is your time to share. Mariana is the CEO of Phyto Solutions, which is a sanitary and phytosanitary consultancy firm based in Pretoria, South Africa. She also holds the position of General Manager for the Fresh Produce Importers Association of South Africa, and she's a part-time lecturer in Pest Risk Analysis, PRA, at the National Biosecurity Hub of the University of Pretoria. She's a qualified entomologist and holds a master's degree in plant quarantine. Her experience include SPS policy, capacity development, regional harmonization, domestication of international standards. So as you can tell, she has quite a lot of experience, and she makes a perfect speaker for us today to tell you about her experience. Mariana, we are all ears.
Good day. Thank you, Marie-Helene. I hope the screen is shared well and that I'm audible. Thank you so much, and thank you to COLEAD for the invitation here today to share with you some of our experiences with the systems approach for phytosanitary pest management in South Africa. I'm going to focus a little bit my presentation on the citrus value chain, because I do believe that's the most interesting one, as it doesn't only present a simple systems approach, but we are dealing with a few pests of concern to Europe. So we're seeing a sort of a multi-layered type of systems approach. So my focus of the presentation will be a bit more on the citrus side, hoping to give you an example of what we've done. As you know, South Africa is one of the Southern Hemisphere's largest citrus exporters, and our continued market access depends on this very robust science-based pest management system. The presentation that I will go through will cover the key pest threats that we see, the integrated measures that we deploy from orchard to port, and then the regulatory requirements across these our major markets. I'll touch on the East and the USA, but the focus of the presentation is on the European Union, of course, and how we demonstrate through measurable outcomes the effectiveness of our approach. The approach is grounded in ISPM 14, which we've heard about in Dr. Kagera's presentation, and so based on this international standard. All right, so South Africa's citrus industry, just as a bit of background on the industry itself, the citrus industry in South Africa is a critical component of our agricultural economy, and it generates around $2.8 billion in annual export revenue. So we cultivate over 80,000 hectares, primarily in the provinces of Limpopo, Mpumalanga, the Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape. We saw in the 24-25 citrus export season approximately 2.2 million tons of citrus exported. The European Union remains South Africa's largest market at roughly about 40% of all citrus exports still going to the European Union, followed by then the Middle East and our Asia markets. Our primary export products are navel oranges, Valencia oranges, mandarins, the clementines, satsumas, and soft citrus. These are also the commodities that are most affected by phytosanitary regulations due to the presence of quarantine pests of concern to our destination markets. The industry supports roughly 145,000 direct and indirect jobs. So it makes it a significant contributor to rural employment and economic development in South Africa. We're dealing with, for the citrus value chain, 3 phytosanitary key threats or major pests that are also primary drivers of our phytosanitary compliance requirements. First of all, the false codling moth, and we've heard in previous presentations, you've heard about false codling moth and the pain and the headache it creates, especially for exports to the European Union. The moth is definitely the most consequential of all the quarantine pests. It was formally listed as an EU quarantine pest in 2022, and then triggering mandatory systems approach requirements following the listing. So the larvae develops inside the fruit, which makes, as an internal feeder, it makes it also a very difficult pest to manage, and especially at inspection points, very difficult to detect. So it is we have a false codling moth systems approach that have been developed specifically for the European Union market. It is mandatory for all our citrus, except for lemons and key limes, of course, which are exempt because they are non-hosts. Then the next one of concern is citrus black spot. For the European Union, this fungal disease, mostly causing cosmetic lesions on fruit rind, has been prohibited on imports from host citrus from CBS endemic areas such as South Africa, and this is done unless there are certified pest-free status or approved treatments put in place. In the case of South Africa, we apply the pest-free status option. And then, of course, when there's a single rejection or interception of a CBS on consignment, that consignment and production unit gets rejected or gets a full rejection listed. Then fruit flies, of course, from South Africa, mostly the Ceratitis rosa and Ceratitis capitata. Those are the 2 main problem fruit flies on our citrus exports to the EU. They are quarantine pests for virtually all our export markets, actually. And we have options of cold treatment and irradiation that are used as primary mitigation measures. Understanding these pest threats is essential for why we have developed this multi-layered systems approach and how it is necessary rather than relying on a single measure. Of course, we base the development of our systems approach has been guided and based on the International Standard for Phytosanitary Measures, number 14, and it provides us with the justification and a harmonized approach that we're looking for in international trade. So what is a systems approach? I am not going to go into too much detail. I think you've heard very good presentations already on explaining how the systems approach work and what are the crucial requirements for a successful systems approach. But I do want to highlight just a few things. And as it is defined in ISPM 14, which provides us the framework for an integrated measures in pest risk management. So the core principle here is that we're working with multiple independent measures, none of which alone achieves the required level of protection, but together gives us compliance that are equivalent to a single definitive treatment that meets the appropriate level of protection of our destination market. So we have 6 key principles here that underlies or underpins our systems approach. First of all, redundancy. So we see multiple overlapping measures that ensures that if the one fails, others compensate. And that gives us a way of tweaking the system, of addressing where we see there are gaps or failures, where we have the opportunity to improve on a single independent measure. Secondly, we have the principle of transparency and traceability rather, which requires that every single step in the system is documented from orchard registration right through to the port of entry. We have independence, how each and every measure operates independently, the verification, how regular audits, inspection, and data analysis validate the effectiveness of the system. We do monitoring and continuous monitoring, of course, that allows us to feed data back into the system and allows us to refine protocols each and every season. And of course, the cumulative effect, the combined probability of pest survival that is mathematically reduced to acceptable levels. So this framework is endorsed by the IPPC, the whole systems approach, EPO, and our NPPO has been applying it, the National Plant Protection Organization of South Africa, in collaboration with its role players and stakeholders, have been applying it very successfully over the last few years. Just a quick glance at the main components of the system. If you think about the value chain from orchard through to port, and where these multiple measures are at every stage of the supply chain used. So first, in our orchard management phase, we include actions, pest monitoring, sanitation, of course, spray programs, and trapping networks. And these measures in combination reduce the pest populations at the source. So we're trying to keep the pest inoculum as low as possible. Then we move on to stage 2, which focuses on the pre-harvest inspections. Here we rely heavily on things like fruit sampling, threshold checks, orchard registrations. That gives us also that traceability that we need. The quality control processes that eliminate remaining pest risk at the processing level. Again, at pre-harvest inspection, it includes the monitoring and surveillance to support the area freedom status. When we move on to the pack house, there are a few actions there that has been defined and incorporated, and it gives us this post-harvest verification. We include sorting and grading, of course, of the product, fungicide treatments, cold sterilization or cold storage, and quality control processes that eliminate a remaining pest risk at that processing packaging level. And then stage 4, which brings us to the post-harvest verification. Here we include laboratory testing, like the diagnostics, the phytosanitary certification, the actual export consignment inspection and certification, and then the final clearance that provides us with that absolute last line of defense before the product leaves for the destination market. The critical point is that each stage operates independently, and the cumulative effect that we get over and across all these 4 stages gives us a reduction in the pest levels that brings us to that are acceptable for the European Union. So just quickly looking at the pre-harvest measures at orchard level, the interventions that reduce the pest populations before the fruit reaches the packhouse. So just a little bit elaboration. I'm not going to go into too much detail, however, but because we are limited in our time, but just to give you a quick overview. And it's important because the pre-harvest measures, the measures that are designed and applied at orchard level gives us about 50 to 80% of the overall pest reduction. So these are very important. And these are also approached as a shared responsibility. So the competent authority engages very closely with the growers and the producers' organizations and their extension personnel to ensure that we get these measures right. So we've got the orchard registration and mapping, where all export orchards that are registered with the Department of Agriculture are GPS mapped for traceability, and they're part also of an area-wide monitoring system. We have FCM trapping networks, specifically where pheromone traps are deployed at prescribed densities. We've got trap counts that are monitored at a weekly basis with very strict threshold-based decisions. We have a sterile insect technique where release of sterile male FCM moths in production areas to suppress the wild populations below economic thresholds are employed. We have, of course, the orchard sanitation, the integrated pest management practices, where with orchard sanitation, the removal of and destruction of fallen and infested fruit, weed management, and so on are helping to reduce the pest sites. And then fungicide programs. We have scheduled copper and strobilurin applications from October to March, and during the seasons that are timed with rain events for maximum efficacy. And that's, of course, an important consideration whenever you apply chemical treatments to ensure that your timing is correct. Quickly looking at the post-harvest and the packhouse measures, we have the fruiting and grading. These are multi-stage visual and electronics inspection uses where we remove fruits that are blemished, infested, or symptomatic. And then we've got the cold treatment. Fruit is now under the new stricter requirements, required to be held at a prescribed temperature of 0.6 degrees for more than 22 days. And this is to eliminate the live FCM and fruit fly larvae. We have the post-harvest fungicide applications and then controlled atmosphere environments that are used in the packhouse. We have a pre-shipment inspection, and then followed with the final official certificate, phytosanitary certificate. So just to mention maybe here that reports from orchard inspections and verifications and confirmations of compliance, all of that are used by the inspector doing the final inspection to tick off that the pre-harvest as well as post-harvest requirements have been met. So when we look at the critical management requirements for this program, time is of the essence, and there are very specific timelines that are linked to the program. And this is, of course, linked to our seasonal availability and the season. So we go through a review every year. We have a few platforms that are used to engage the NPPO and industry and the academia and researchers that support the Market Access Initiative. And so we have an annual, what we call a coordinating meeting, where all the role players meet with the competent authorities, and it's used as a briefing for the season ahead, but also in a way to debrief on the previous season and to discuss and reflect on what can be done better and what worked well in the previous season that should be continued. So we have typically, we just last month, we did the CBS symptom expression test, for instance, where testing in the Valencia type orchards started. We have inspection deadlines where PPCB is the Perishable Products Export Control Board. It is an assignee of the competent authority, the NPPO of South Africa, and assists with a lot of the pre-harvest inspections. And we've got a due date on the packaging and when the declarations needs to be done. And then, of course, these annual registrations, which is very important. Annually, farms are inspected, the production units, the pack houses, the cold stores, to ensure that they are compliant. And once they are compliant, confirmed by the regulatory authorities, they're registered on the South African electronic system called FitClean, which is linked to our electronic certification system. There's mandatory training of the packhouse managers, samplers, which is from the inspection services as well, the NPPO inspection services, as well as the industry that assists with some of the sampling. And then, of course, the traceability, the orchard numbers, that ensuring that they're all clearly marked, and the cartons, and that the date codes and the full traceability aspects are covered. So throughout the year, there are various meetings that focus on the industry, the citrus industry, and similarly affected in other industries, but to the different markets and the requirements for the different markets. And this is just to give you a bit of a quick comparison of what we're doing for the different major markets of citrus exports. So first of all, of course, the European Union being our most important export market, followed by the United States and the Asia and the Middle East. So for the EU, we have FCM that was listed in EU Regulation 2019 or 2072 of 2019, and it has been listed in 2022 as a pest. And we have the cold treatment and the whole systems approach that was accepted. Then we have the CBS, and we have cold treatment, CBS pest-free areas, or treated fruit if they're not from a pest-free area. And then for FCM host status, also the cold treatment, that's mandatory. And yeah, the interceptions, I'll give you a quick overview of the interception later and how that has changed over the last couple of years. But for the United States, we're looking at cold treatment for fruit flies, pre-clearance programs that are available, and we use the same FCM risk management via our South African systems approach for FCM. And then, of course, there's a bilateral protocol reviews and so on. That's part and parcel of any of these bilateral markets. For Asia and the Middle East, mostly the markets of China, Japan, South Korea, we do the normal phytosanitary certificates as per ISPM 12. There's cold treatment for specified pests. market specific MRL, maximum residue limit compliance, and then quite a lot of focus on expanding those markets currently. We don't see as stringent measures as we do for Europe. So for some of the citrus producers, the Asia Middle East market provides a welcome alternative. Then when we consider the systems approach and how it has delivered measurable phytosanitary security while it's enabling trade, just a quick graph to show you how FCM interception numbers declined from 83 in 2019-2020 season to just 14 in the 24-25 season. So, and this has been because of the implementation, mostly because of the implementation and tweaking of our systems approach. The key benefits that that stood out was the trade was able to continue. The systems approach maintains. It's given us market access worth of more than $2.8 billion. So it is a very valuable tool for us to continue trade. It reduced rejections. We saw interceptions decline with nearly 83% over six seasons through systematic improvements of the system. And that gives our trade partners, of course, important confidence in the South African product and the South African export phytosanitary system as a whole. And then thirdly, I think important was cost effectiveness. Rather than relying on a single expensive treatment, the systems approach then distributes the cost across multiple supply chain stages and players, making it more economically sustainable for the industry. The bottom line here is that the approach is, again, internationally recognized, accepted by the European Union, and it gives us a good scientific basis. We still have challenges. We've seen in 2025 the system work, so the system is continuing into the 2026 period, and while we see these strict measures, we know that they will continue to at least until 2028. So we are continuing with a market that is not easy, that has some high annual costs for the industry, but and requires a lot of infrastructure investment. There's a lot of strain on the supply chain, and we've got to keep in mind also possible future and current ongoing changes on the environmental regulations, for instance, of the European Union, referring to the EU Green Deal that's increasing the scrutiny on the use of pesticides and production practices. So that's something to also keep in mind. And then, of course, the new packaging rules that comes into effect now in August 2026. South Africa has, in terms of CBS, also argued that the EU measures are not based on science, and there is a bilateral dispute going on, speaking about barriers and how these are very stringent without the necessary pest risk necessarily. This is an ongoing process, of course. And it is at the World Trade, being addressed at the World Trade Organization level. The protocols, what is important also is the operational and logistical barriers that comes with very complex protocols. So timing of implementation, new regulations have historically been introduced in the middle of our export season, for instance, and that has caused massive disruptions to pre-arranged logistics and, of course, leading to blockaded fruit at export. And then we've seen shipping delays and, of course, a lot of pressure on our domestic infrastructure, which is ongoing. We're dealing with ports that are also vulnerable to major climatic conditions, which adds to the logistic challenge. Very quickly on the socioeconomic impact front, I just wanted to mention that, the systems approach has given us access to market, has secured access, ongoing access to market. But it is, and I think this is true for many phytosanitary measures, where it does have the risk of not being viable for new and small scale growers. So there's a lot of responsibility on authorities to provide support and industries to larger, especially larger scaled commercial industries, to bring the smaller scale growers on board and do a lot of training and helps. We've seen the Citrus Growers Association of South Africa that has warned recently about these continued intensified measures and how they could eventually end up threatening thousands of jobs in a sector, especially in South Africa, where it's a sector that is a major contributor to the agricultural foreign earnings of the country. So we see the WTO SPS escalation. There's definitely seasonal export season impact. In 2025, the Exporters Forum of South Africa has, for instance, prematurely stopped some Valencia orange exports to the EU in September already to prevent it from being rejected. And then, of course, despite all of these hurdles, we continue to work on strengthening the market and building and strengthening technical capacity, of course. So I know it's quite a lot in a short time, but I thank you for your time and for allowing me to share some of our experiences with you. Thank you. Marie-Hélène.
Un tout grand merci, Mariana. Oui, c'était effectivement très, très important et très intéressant d'avoir votre expérience. On a appris beaucoup de choses. Donc,
Thank you,
c'était un peu
Mariana.
plus long
Indeed,
que
it was
prévu,
extremely
désolée pour les
interesting,
participants.
and we learned a
On
lot.
avait abordé
It was a bit longer than expected. Sorry to the
partie pour le webinaire,
participants.
ça valait
We
vraiment la peine.
have gone
Donc,
over
encore
the
merci,
allotted
Mariana.
time
Donc, concernant les
of
questions,
the
on a répondu à
webinar.
quelques
Now,
questions
regarding the questions, we
par
were
écrit.
able
Je vais
to
peut-être répondre
reply
qu'une
to
seule,
some of the
justement,
questions
juste à
in
une seule
writing.
question,